February 2nd will come to order. Roll call, City Clerk.
Commissioner Abraham,
Present.
Commissioner Galt,
Present.
Commissioner Rhodes,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Present.
Mayor Kaler.
Present. Commissioner Abraham, if you'll do the invocation, please, and Commissioner Galt, the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's just repeat the Lord's Prayer together, if you will. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And the power and the glory forever. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to its republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Manager, are there any additions or deletions?
There are none.
Okay, our workshop tonight is on capital funding, and is John going to come on up now?
I'm
Come on
gonna,
up, John.
Give the lead in here. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for coming together tonight, Department Directors. What we're going to do tonight is begin with you the process for the 2016-2017 budget development, taking a look at capital projects, primarily capital projects resources. As you recall, well, first let me say, for those that may not know, that essentially the city capital projects funding comes from what is known as the investment fund, which was the half-cent payroll tax addition that occurred over a decade ago now. That was put in place for categorical purposes, and over that period of time, a number of things have come to be funded out of that area. In fact, some of which were previously operational appropriations in the general fund, which is to say that when the half-cent payroll tax was put in place, and I believe as part of that the property tax mill levy was decreased, it was not a net gain as far as the investment fund monies, because some of that money replaced some revenue reductions that occurred when the property tax mill levy was reduced. So what we'd like to do tonight is give an overview of really the way that is structured tonight, so that it gives all of you and the public a stronger foundation of understanding just how the city's capital funding is aligned right now, but more especially what the resource issues are in terms of constraints that might exist to accommodate additional demands on the investment fund going forward, particularly those of a capital project nature. We did this year, the department directors and the finance staff advanced the capital improvement planning process over where it was taken last year. Last year was a huge step forward in that, and we had a workshop with you all mid-spring, I suppose, that brought a number of projects forward that showed you what the projects were, where they might align on a time frame, and what the matchup might be between the projected project costs and available resources. And somewhat predictably, that matchup resulted in a pretty big imbalance between project funding requirements and what the available resources were, suggesting that there may be a need to do some revenue enhancement, and I've already been quoted in the public saying that, so I don't mind saying it again tonight, occur should the city find the need to implement one or more of those projects, especially any of those that had significant size. So we think the logical starting point tonight, or pickup point back on this thing, after the department directors have already updated the capital improvement plans from last year, updated projects for any changes that might have occurred in scope, projected cost, or even implementation in some cases. We have taken the total list and refined it down to a number of projects, approximately 12, that really represent the projects that are needing consideration for funding and most likely some enhancement to existing revenues to be able to fund if they are to be implemented. So it's not our purpose to dissect those projects tonight, discuss them in any great detail. In fact, I want to do that with subsequent workshops where we would come back and focus on one or more of those projects. Tonight is all about the resource side of it, such that we all have a better basis of understanding of what our resource issues are at present. We would encourage you to ask questions along the way as John makes his presentation. Any questions you have that aren't covered, please ask. We'll stop and respond to those. We aren't asking for any major decisions tonight, but I will speak a little bit when John's finished with his presentation about the process going forward, at least as we see it. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to John.
And that wraps up our presentation. Do you have any questions? It's a joke. He spoke. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Tonight, we're going to talk about 4 major topics here. And if you just follow along with me on the PowerPoint, these topics are the 2013B general obligation bond proceeds. Remember back in September of 2013, we floated a bond issue to deal with an economic development project. That didn't take place, and so the funds are still there with little interest, and we propose to use those proceeds for some things. The next item is the general fund unreserved cash, rather fund balance, which is going to be cash. The next item is the investment fund, which I know you're very familiar with, and that's, again, as the city manager just said, funded by the half-cent payroll tax. And the last topic is capital project items. So let's just start at the beginning. As you can see, the very first line there, it's called the taxable 2013B general obligation bond proceeds. Again, back in 2013, we floated a bond issue. These are the proceeds. We're currently making bond payments on that over the next number of years. And so the money's available. It's in cash. And so rather than to let it sit around and to do nothing, we have a lot of items that we need to deal with. And you can see those 4 items that we propose that we would use it for. In fact, I believe the first one, you may have already crossed that bridge and have already done that. The next item there, the Olivet Church Road, we believe that's what it's probably going to take locally to wrap that thing up completely. And as you may remember, the state gave us $6.2 million. They didn't give us quite enough to cover it all, but we hope that that'll do it. Third item there, it's 5th and Broadway. That's the demolition. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. And in fact, I believe they're tearing that building down today, started this recently. We hope that's enough locally to get that taken care of, plus the bonds, and we already had some funds put aside. And then the 4th item is the City Hall design, as you passed a contract with the ratio company. Now, this is only part of it. And what this represents is the difference between what we have available, those first three items, and that's just what's available here. So if you add up those 4 items, you'll get that $1,272,000 if we did this right. Any questions so far?
We've made reference to the MACO proceeds from time to time. While that was the purpose for which it was done, it did not materialize, so that money has been essentially unprogrammed. But as we have encountered needs over the past several months, we have associated needs with this source of money. John has commented to me on more than one occasion that he thinks it's been spent 5 or 6 times. This is a rollback to that, in that this would be a suggestion for how to spend it the one and only time that it can be spent.
Good. Okay. This next section, we're going to talk about the general funds, fund reserve. You may recall that every year when we do the budget, if you look at the fine print on the last page of the ordinance that sets our budget in place, we always put in there that we have a policy that says we will have not less than 10% of the budget or expenditure budget set aside in the general fund in cash. And so today that's right around $3 million. In reality, we probably have a 15% reserve. Local policy or ordinance requires 10%. And as you can see from the graphic, Standard & Poor's views that as strong. Even at 10, we're strong. We'd love to be exceptionally strong, but that's just not in the cards at the moment. I'll tell you that to get to this. The unreserved fund balance, in plain English, that's just cash. And we all know what cash is. And the way we arrive at this is we figure out how much cash we have at the end of a fiscal year. We have to put aside the 10% in cash, so that's $3 million. And this is what is in excess of the 10% requirement. And you see that small footnote there, cash in the general fund in excess of 10% reserve requirement. Of that $2 million that we have, we propose the following items that we would, and again, you already passed, I believe, the first ordinance to deal with the 911 equipment consulting. This would be our side, not only that and the balance of that contract. And then the line right below that, the City Hall design for ratio, that makes up the balance of the ratio contract if you need that. The maximum payout for the ratio contract is $1,622,000. If you were to add up that line item plus the one you just saw, that's what that should be. It's not to say they would ever be used, but at least it's obligated and ready to be used. And that last line, that 986, almost 987,000, that is what is available today that you can use. It's unreserved at this moment. Does that make sense?
So these are capital monies that were not that did not derive from the half-cent payroll tax at all. They're not that, but they're expenditures that essentially flow through the investment fund because it's through the investment fund that a lot of our capital expenditures are made. So it's very closely associated with the investment fund from a project point of view, but it's a resource that's entirely different than the half-cent payroll. Here again, that $2 million unreserved fund balance is general fund money, not investment fund money, which means it's a combination of 2% payroll tax, property tax, insurance premium tax, and every other revenue source that's in the general fund. So it's in a way closing out excess revenue in an operational fund to make available for capital financing. Correct, John?
In fact, another way you can look at this is somebody may say, well, how in the world did you accumulate that? Well, this is how you did it. We spent less than we brought in. Let me repeat that. We spent less than we brought in over a number of years. So it's not like we spent every nickel we had. See that? I see that in the headlines now.
Are you saying like a homeowner who budgets by the SAC method, so much for food and repairs and all the different accounts, and at the end of the year, he looks in those sacks and he has a little bit of money for each one, and so he dumps them all into a bigger sack and says, here's what we got that we didn't spend this year.
Yes.
It's from all the departments.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Sort of swept.
That's exactly right. Or we may have budgeted anticipating X for revenue, and we receive more. More likely than that, we usually budget and people spend less than we think they're going to spend, or a combination. But bottom line is, some years we spend more than we have, some years we spend less than we have, but over a combination of years, that's how that accumulated. And I mean, that's a good thing. Okay. Now, that was point number 2. Point number 3 is the investment fund. That's the one that the city manager was just talking about. Next year, we project that we will have $4.94 million available to use for something. Now, that's assuming that our projections for revenue are correct. It could be more, it could be less. But the way we developed this, again, these are projected things, they're not guaranteed. We broke it down into 5 parts: debt service, streets and sidewalks, one-time small capital projects, ongoing commitments, and the balance of that fund. And you can see the ratios, the percentages in there. Our job is going to be to hopefully explain this and make it clear. It's kind of like going to the eye doctor here. When we're done, hopefully, this is where you're going to see things. You had to be looking at that, Tammy, when I did it. Sorry. First part of the investment fund, debt service, is in the red. 37% of all projected revenues will go toward debt service. Now, debt service is at home, that'd be your house payment, your car payment, your visa payment, your TV payment, all your payments. And there are obligations that the city has. In our case, it would be on parks, streets, all kinds of different things, economic development and others that we've managed to borrow over the years. And these are the payments. 37% amounts to about $1.8 million.
John, I think it's well to point out that those debt service payments essentially are paying off capital asset acquisitions or major reinvestments in capital assets. They're not associated with operational expenses or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
it's a building or a big piece of equipment or the reinvestment in those kinds of things. Typically,
We do not borrow money to operate. This is pure capital, brick and mortar and things of that nature. In fact, let's look at the detail. I know that's really hard to see. I'll give you an idea. We've broken it into 2 parts: economic development type loans. We borrowed money to do different things, like Teletech, for instance. That's the most recent one, I believe. We borrowed $1.35 million over 15 years to build a building, and the county matched that. And I think PED also put some money into that project. Then you jump down to the infrastructure and capital improvements, and you can see, like the second one down, 2009, we went to Kentucky League of Cities, and we borrowed money to do, believe it or not, a major flood wall renovation. And also, I think we used some money to buy some land for the county jail at that time. And then you see the very last one there. It's Mark's gym there, Margaret Hank Gym. And if you look at that footnote below, we want to make sure that everybody understood this. It won't be until the year 2019, a couple years out, that we'll finally free up. Some of these payments will fall off. And you can see $100,000 will free up for the investment fund owes the Fleet Trust Fund money. Remember, several years ago, we borrowed money to buy the Owens property. And so that's how we did it. We borrowed from the trust fund. We're paying that back. And then Margaret Hank will be paid off in a couple years. And then you have to go out several more years after that, the year 2023. That's a 2003 bond issue, 20-year issue, will finally be paid off. And it'll free up $217,000. So by that time, you'll have some wiggle room, more than we do now. Does that make sense? Okay. Next category is called streets and sidewalks. This is stuff that you're all very familiar with. We make it a point to try to appropriate around $1.5 million every year to pave, fix curb and gutters, sidewalks, inlets, all kinds of things. When we go fix roads, we don't just slap asphalt down, we fix everything. And that's just the way we do it. The state gives us maybe $500,000 a year to do that. And so this fund, and you can see up there, streets and sidewalks, $948,000, makes up about 2/3 of that $1.5 million. Without the investment fund, we just be in a world of hurt. And so we would never suggest that we cut that. Now, there have been years in the past where to get this thing to balance and we wanted to fund something else, we did cut that. It hasn't worked out well. Does everybody understand that? Have any questions about how that works? And there's just a breakdown between streets and sidewalks. Okay, the next category is one-time small capital projects. And here's the detail for that. This category contains projects that are one-time projects in nature, or small in size, or they're just too small to be a debt issue on their own. Let's talk about, for instance, the economic impact, and City Manager might want to chime in here. These are items that we fund. We hope that we don't have to use it, but if it rolls from year to year, it accumulates. That used to be much bigger than that. It used to be probably several years ago, what, $300,000?
I think my first year here, it was at either 200 or 3, and we took it down twice and leveled it off at 75. Last year, for example, the city paid half of the sponsorship of the Bass Championship tournament, and so that came out of here, tied into the economic impact of that event. So those kinds of things that come up from time to time, and other things not too dissimilar. We end up spending a fair amount of that every year, but what isn't spent falls back into the fund balance and is reappropriated the next year somewhere.
Right. And on that particular line item, there's been a lot of pressure over the years, primarily from debt service. As that increases, the thing people oftentimes don't realize, so you borrow the money, you got to pay it back. We have the capacity to borrow, I think, like $175 million, but we don't have the capacity to pay it off. And the debt service happens every year as long as the debt is around, as long as you have an outstanding balance. So if we have $100,000 this year, yeah, we can borrow some money and fit that payment to that $100,000, but you got to have it next year and the next year for 20 years in some cases. So that has gone down a lot because of that. You can see the other two items, the continuing software upgrade. We're working on that at present. We funded some last year and the year before that, and I believe there's a couple more years we need to do that. As you recall, that'll be a big change in the way we do business. The last item there is the flood wall rehab design, what we need to do.
If I could comment on this particular slice of pie, as I did last year, this is so critical that that dollar amount not be reduced if we don't have to, because this is money that effectively turns over from year to year, even though the software upgrade is a multi-year commitment just because of the size of it. But for example, it was from this piece of the pie that we did the Noble Park Bank Stabilization Phase 1, and maybe we can do Phase 2 someday out of this as well. So it gives us flexibility, and it gives us the ability to respond to smaller projects without having to go in debt, where we take $1 and add it to something else, and it comes away from here. That flexibility begins to erode. So keep in mind how the slices of the pie get redone when dollars shift from one area to the other.
Okay. Next category is called the ongoing commitments, or our ongoing commitments. Easiest way to explain that is just to show you the detail. Over the years, we've committed ourselves to certain things. In recent years, the very first line item there, when we did the Teltec deal, in the MOU, the city and the county both committed to paying for the property tax on the facility in which the Teltec folks reside. So you're paying the property tax. And I work with property tax enough to know that if we don't pay that, I might foreclose on us.
And be tough to deal with.
Yeah. Most of that tax is actually school tax. Well, out there it may not be. But anyway, that's what that is. And that's what you committed to do. The second item there, the neighborhood revitalization, as you'll recall, when we set the original half-cent payroll tax up, there were 4 elements that we wanted to deal with. One was neighborhood revitalization. One was economic development. Another was property tax reduction, which we've done. And capital outlays and infrastructure. And so neighborhood redevelopment is one of the 4 tenets. And so we think that's a commitment we need to continue with. The next item, the AQS, recently we've changed that to, you may be asking why that's not 50 instead of 25. Well, the double that both shows don't take place until the fall of 17. So that'll be fiscal 18. So that'll go from 25 to 50. Next line item is just the audit of the fund. And the last three items, those are our facilities that we, since city manager's been here, we've put money aside to fix things. We get people that say we don't maintain. Maybe that's been true in the past, but we're sure trying to fix that problem. I always tell the story of, it's like we have some money. Johnny comes, your kid comes to you, and he's got a lot of cash. He doesn't have any expenses. And he has a hole in his roof. He's got money, but he knows you have money too. And he comes in and he says, can I have some money to fix my roof? And you say, well, sure, Johnny, you can have that money. And then we turn around as a parent. We go to the bank and borrow the money to fix the roof of our own house. And we've done that a lot. And I think that's something that we've got to be very careful of doing. Anyway, the last three items are monies we put aside to fix our facilities, from parks facilities, City Hall. And as you know, we have a lot of lease properties that we own downtown and probation parole. We are responsible for maintaining those buildings. And that's what this is. Any questions on that? Okay, and then the last section is really it's not a category for expenditure. This is just what's left over. After you take out those first four categories, which we're obligated to deal with, this last bunch is about 20% of the fund, $1 million about. And I guess the best way to explain this one to you is to show you the detail. But before I do that, I want you to hear this first. If we appropriate the same amount next year as we did last year, we do not, and I repeat, do not have sufficient resources to cover all of those items. As if we did exactly the same thing next year as we did last year, we can't do it. Or you got to cut something, you got to add, if you want to add something, you got to cut something. If you want it to be balanced, that is. We'll be short, if we did again what we did last year, by $80,000. Here's the detail. Again, these are historic budget funding items. Nothing would keep the commission from removing or reducing or adding to the list. Please keep in mind a couple of items here. For example, you may want to consider keeping the downtown program incentive to fund items like the roof stabilization. You know, we're fixing a building right now that could have used the roof stabilization program to fix that roof. And we got lucky. We received a $500,000 grant, and we had to match it. But we don't need that to continue to happen. We may not get that $500,000 again. You know, we were all sweating bullets when we were thinking about that. And so that money helps to fund that kind of a program. Or you may recall the last item on the list there, that's money we use to demolish structures throughout the city. I mean, you may have a structure next to your house that's fallen down, and it does not enhance the value of your property, and I know you hear that a lot. And so I know our fire department, through Chief Kyle, have done an outstanding job of knocking buildings down as quickly as we can within legal bounds of the law with the limited resources that we have. And that's what that does. And then I don't want to forget the very first item up there, our friends over at PED. I know one of our big things is to do economic development, and this helps them to do that. And so then everything in between. These are things, again, that have been funded for many, many years. You can continue to do business as you have in the past, or you can change it.
And the airport operating subsidy has gone down over the last few years.
That actually represents a projection that it's going to, the request will be less based on the conversation with the director last year. I did not, I meant to several times, follow up with that, so that figure may or may not be accurate, but I think the previous amount was approximately double that.
Yeah, it was double that.
There was indications that the request would be reduced this year. So,
any questions on any of that so far? Because I think this is where city manager gets to pick up here. You just want to
thank
talk
you, John,
about it, or?
And thank you, Audra, as well, who's here tonight. Audra, do you have anything you wanted to add? Okay.
She just came to have fun.
Hopefully the imagery is pretty meaningful. A pie is always helpful in slicing the pie. And the key thing there is that the pie is finite. You got two issues. It's how you slice the pie, and then the second one being is how you size the pie. And you have the ability to make the determination for either or both. And we are at the point in time where we may need to consider making the pie bigger, depending on what's before us and what you want to do. And quite frankly, as John said, depending on whether or not you want to make any changes in the areas where funds have been historically allocated that are outside of, say, mandates or legal responsibilities or bond commitments or that sort of thing. We, as I mentioned, we refined the CIP program this year and came up with a number of projects that have brought forward or have emerged over time. Projects that all have merit. There are probably some differences between them in terms of urgency or immediacy, or where they might fall on the needs versus want continuum. Nonetheless, it's still a fairly large list in terms of dollars. I'll just mention what's on there. Second Street parking lot rehabilitation, and by the way, I believe these were all on the list last spring. Streetscape improvements, maybe that wasn't, but that has to do with the vegetation and the streetscaping in downtown Paducah. Broadway and Jefferson conversion with bike lanes. Flood wall rehabilitation construction, and by the way, that's a first phase or initial project there. City Hall, Dolly McNutt renovation, repairs. Fire training field is something that's emerged relatively recently. I don't recall if it was on there last year or not, but it's associated with the interest, if not the need, that the JSA has in acquiring that property to put facilities for its new project to come into compliance with their decree orders. Fire station number 4, larger garage that will be needed when the next apparatus upgrade occurs. Phase 2 of the Noble Park bank stabilization. I know everybody looks forward to that. It's one of the, I think, more well-received projects with the public that's occurred in recent years. Stuart Nelson Park softball field improvements has been on the drawing board and been worked on for a few years now. Riverfront Commons area is the Executive Inn site, and that figure that's in there, again, these are just figures that are associated with where we think the planning might be today, and that one is still, it's a little beyond conceptual in that it's at the master plan stage, but we still think that's a fairly early stage, and that figure could change. Stuart Nelson road improvements. With all of the increased activity in Stuart Nelson Park associated with the Frisbee, but maybe, well, there's a lot of cars that you'll see in there doing that, but also the 2 dog parks. There's a serious need to consider upgrading that road moving in there. I believe that road upgrade was part of a master plan, Mark, going back a number of years, 95, and some of that stuff is materialized now, and yet the road is still substandard to where it was before those improvements. And lastly, the stormwater sewer study. Again, these are projects that are before us that we need to be taking a look at. I think that you need to give us direction on what you want to do, or at the very least hear some recommendations or respond to some recommendations for those. I want to continue on. Let's go to the next page. We already showed the $2 million unreserved general fund balance, and where we feel that at least almost half of that needs to be allocated, the E911 equipment consulting, and then a portion of the City Hall design. If you go to the next page, proposed possible use for the balance of $986,000. I'm throwing out their stormwater management study. That is something that it's somewhat associated with the water issues that rose to the top, so to speak, last summer. It's also associated with the fact that we've not had a system analysis done in 20 years, and there's a real need to do that. And in the opinion of the city engineer and our stormwater engineer and others, the best way to approach that is in a comprehensive way, analysis of the system so that all of the linkages are understood, how the knee bone connects to the thigh bone and this and that and what have you, so a very systemic view can be taken of that system out there and where the start and stop points are for improvements to it. What I would recommend doing with this is, we're not asking for a decision on what to do with that money tonight, but I believe you would agree that that issue bears a workshop presentation where Rick and Eric can come before you and explain the approach they would like to take and what the merits of it might be, what it would lead to, and the position the city would be put in as a result of that to really gear up and establish an ongoing commitment to improving our stormwater management system out there. Because, as we know, it really does not have a presence in the city budget. It's been a long time since any kind of capital improvement project was done of any size, and at that time, I'm not sure if it was bonded for, but there was some serious money that needed to be found that's really not there right now. The operational commitment we have to stormwater management in the public works budget is lower than it needs to be. So we need to take a look at this very comprehensively and make a determination. Does the city of Paducah need to get into stormwater management in a serious way? So I'd like to have that be a presentation at a workshop as early as 2 weeks from tonight and start down the road with that one. As far as other items on that list that I feel and am comfortable advising you we need to put some focus on, the next one would be the flood wall system. We remain uncertain when federal appropriations might materialize. We really don't have any better idea of that now than we did last year or the year before. Rick's further down the road with the Corps and the planning and the staging and the design and all these sort of things. In fact, he's so far down the road with that one option I think that's a important option for you all to consider would be whether we want to break out with the project on our own, a phase one, if you will, that would be in partnership with the Corps, but yet would not be funded initially by a federal appropriation. Why we think that's worthy of consideration, in addition to the merits of the project, would be that at this point in time, we believe that the Corps would allow our funds that went into that project to count towards matching requirements for projects down the road when the federal appropriations did materialize. So it'd be, in a sense, putting money in the bank for that. The project that Rick would like to bring forward and go over with you is the pump station number 2 rehabilitation and a comprehensive rehabilitation of that. So my recommendation tonight as well would be that we have a study session and let Rick bring that forward for you to look at as it stands. The Corps of Engineers is due into town on Thursday for a meeting during which we hope to bring as much clarity to the future as we can. One thing we are pretty certain of right now is that our efforts in lobbying the federal delegation to get these appropriations started really need to intensify, and this needs to become a huge priority for this community, given the importance of that flood wall to the community. Obviously, it's a system in itself, but it's also part of the stormwater management system in the community. And there's no component of that management system that is more important to the community than the number 2 pump station. So, with your permission, we would like to come back and have a workshop and look at that as well. As far as other projects on the list, we would take direction from you on where else you wanted to go. Obviously, we're on a pathway to do something with City Hall that's going to require a determination at some point in time of on the resource side of it, because the capacity to move forward with an implementation of some project at the investment stage, implementation stage, does not exist at present. So that's another issue that needs to be looked at, and at some point in time, decisions made. I'd like to open up for any questions you might have. That really completes our presentation tonight, and hopefully that gives everybody a little clearer picture of our capital funding program and its capabilities, limitations, what we've done with it historically.
I would like to compliment you all on the presentation. I mean, it's very clear and concise, and I like the way you broke it down and then showed the examples of each one. So it makes it really clear on some of the decisions that we have to make here. And I do think the additional workshops are great on some of these larger items that we're going to have to fund some way. The flood wall issue has been around for as long as I've been in the commission. Yes, John?
Sir. You know, that was there.
And we are going to do one on the stormwater. I really think we need a workshop on that.
Yeah, I'd like to come back in 2 weeks and do that one first, because that's a process, to go through to really get the information that we need to start an implementation process with projects, quite frankly, at least capital projects.
Was obviously, to me, the two items that top the list for me were the two that you commented on, the stormwater study. Every time it rains, we got folks holding their breath, and we had a chamber full of folks not too long ago with questions about that with the pump stations and so forth. And then obviously the flood wall. It's beautiful to look at, but its function is obviously the utmost important for the city. So I think it's good that the money that we put into it, we'll get credit for that moving forward. But those two, for me, obviously, is at the top of the list. And then the other items we can talk about, and we can list those priority-wise. But for tonight's purposes, for me, these two that the city manager mentioned, recommended that we look at is pretty much a no-brainer for me.
On the City Hall and Dolly Magnette Plaza, I haven't, I know there's a committee assigned to work at that and look at it, but are they also looking at phased-in improvements to the current City Hall that could begin with the stabilization of the canopy, that could begin with the overhaul of some of the electrical, heating and air and all of that, instead of just a $17.5 million capital expenditure? Are there things that could be looked at for phased in?
I believe it's accurate to say that they are looking at a comprehensive approach to a reinvestment in this building that would bring it up to speed to be functional for another 50 years. in order to have a comparable with a new build in that respect, because obviously a new build would be new systems that were at the beginning of their useful life and so on and so forth. So at present, the answer to that question is no. It's being looked at comprehensively for a investment to take all the systems inside the building, inherent in the building, forward for another 50 years, essentially.
So where did you get that 17, where does the 17.5 million estimate come from?
That is a figure that is a rough estimate. It's not a bankable number by any means.
Wasn't that sort of Bacon Farmer Workman's idea from a couple of years ago?
I think
much.
it's advanced a little bit since that time.
I think that was like 12 to 13 maybe to
I think
renovate
it pushed 15.
Push 15?
Push 15, yeah.
Now, there were different parts to that project. There were,
Well, that figure again, and I'm not representing that as accurate, but that's also inclusive of other costs like leasing property if we move out of here, and these kind of things as well. So again, that's put in there simply as a marker for something to associate with that project. I think again, associated with a 50-year reinvestment in a rehab to match up with a new build in terms of apples for the return as much as you could possibly get.
And it'll be a lot clearer when they actually bring that before the commission and explain all of it. It'll be more concise. They'll probably have numbers a little bit closer to actual costs. So,
well, and I bring that up because when we first looked at this project, there were a couple of issues. There was a few issues with this building. One, the stabilization of it, and then another part of it was the heating, air, those type of things. And I'm not sure that number up there included all of that.
It's meant to include all that. Whether it's accurate or not, I'm not going to say it is.
Okay.
But it's a number that's probably in the ballpark.
So if for the study to include phased-in improvements to make it functional and safe, where do we get that? Where do we get those numbers?
Excuse me, for which project?
City Hall.
Where did we get the number?
So where would we? I mean,
Those will be provided by the architect.
so that will be part of that study.
Yes. And when the two schematics come to you, you'll have some numbers associated with each
Phased
one.
in.
Yes.
Okay.
Those two are rehabilitation and new structure.
Right.
Okay.
And those will be bankable numbers.
Yes. To the best of the architect's
I know.
ability to estimate, yes.
May we get a copy,
Absolutely.
please?
Yeah. Can I say something real quick?
sure.
I didn't do hardly any of this work. Audra did all this work. I want to give her plenty of credit for this.
Thank you, Audra.
So if it's wrong,
Good.
that's my
Really
fault.
Oh, so that's why she's here. All right?
She wanted to make sure I didn't mess it
Yeah,
up.
there you go.
If it's wrong, it's my fault. If it's right, it's hers. But I really would love to do my graphic on planning, if you'll let me do that.
Yeah, I think I just want to make one additional comment at a later point in this, after Audra had done all the numbers crunching and really the hard work. And I just say this because I think it defines the way we approach things around here. Yesterday there were 4 or 5 of us around John's desk trying to figure out what one word worked best in some of this narrative. And there were debates that sometimes lasted longer than what the word maybe justified. But I mean, we try to get it right. We try to say it right. We try to pose it right. We try not to be misleading. Try to be accurate. And it takes minds coming together to increase the odds of that. And I know the same thing happened with John and Audra and probably others in finance and some of the numbers, calculation, the approaches they took to things. And I told the story to Audra and John this morning after we worked so much with pie charts yesterday that I got so hungry I stopped and bought a cherry pie on the way home and I ate half of it and had an upset stomach the rest of the night. But so that's how powerful the imagery really is. So please watch yourselves tonight. One slice of pie is enough.
I had to do it.
So is this John humor?
It's not original. Somebody, that guy stole it from somebody else.
Is that a rodent? That's a
Armadillo.
I think it's a possum. I think, yeah. Failure to plan. That's what happened there.
You're going to get emails, man.
I didn't do it. No animals were harmed in my presentation. We'll move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Any public comments tonight?
Oh, yeah, they're out there.
We don't have an executive session. Meeting's adjourned.
Okay. Well.
They'll never believe me. They'll never believe me.